A man becomes nothing the moment he refuses to define himself. Jean-Paul Sartre. When exactly did you disappear? Not physically, not to the world, but to yourself. Was it the moment you said yes when your soul said no? The first time you smiled to keep the peace instead of speaking the truth? Or maybe it was quieter than that, just a single moment where you chose comfort over clarity, closeness over integrity. You didn't notice it then. No man ever does. You were once different. Raw. Untamed. There was a time you didn't ask permission to be. You spoke your mind without fear. You carried tension in your voice, not apology. And she felt it, that mystery, that force, that quiet refusal to be defined. It stirred her. But then came love, or what you thought was love. And in that pursuit, you began to soften. You withheld parts of yourself. You started adjusting, rewriting, until the man you were became a version of the man she wanted, or needed, or simply tolerated. You thought this was growth, maturity, sacrifice. But what if it was disappearance? This is not a story about heartbreak. It's a story about vanishing in plain sight and what it takes to return to the man you used to be. Before you gave yourself away, you didn't vanish all at once. That's the part most men don't realize until it's too late. It was gradual, invisible, a soft, slow erosion of self. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to betray who you are. You did it in fragments, tiny edits, quiet concessions. Each time she frowned, you adjusted. Each time she pulled away, you reached. Until one day, you looked in the mirror and couldn't find the man who used to look back. You started as something wild, alive, unfiltered. You had opinions, direction, a certain fire behind your eyes. You weren't waiting to be picked. You were moving through life with purpose. And then she appeared beautiful, magnetic, full of potential, and slowly, without even knowing it, you stepped out of your own story and into hers. At first it felt like connection, love, growth. But what you called love was often just your willingness to disappear. You silenced your instincts to seem reasonable. You gave more than you had to seem generous. You said yes when your inner voice begged you to say no. Not because she forced you, but because deep down you believed you had to become someone else to be worthy of her presence. But here's the truth. The moment you abandoned your center, the center of your relationship collapsed too. Because she didn't fall in love with the man who served, she fell in love with the man who stood. So if you're wondering why the spark died, why her eyes no longer linger, it's not because you changed too little. It's because you stopped being the man she couldn't define and became the one she could control. And nothing kills desire faster than a man who disappears even when he's standing right next to her. Bad faith. The lie that feels like love. You told yourself it was love. That's what made it so dangerous. You believed you were growing, becoming more emotionally intelligent, more adaptable, more generous. You called it evolution, maturity. But deep underneath in the silence you never shared, there was something else, fear. Not of her, but of what you thought would happen if you stayed completely true to yourself. You wanted to keep her. You didn't want to be alone. So you started shaping yourself just slightly at first. You softened your tone. You filtered your truth. You began to say what sounded right instead of what was real. And Jean-Paul Sartre had a name for this bad faith. It's the quiet internal betrayal when you pretend to be something you're not to lie to others, but to avoid confronting yourself. You didn't lie to her. You lied to you. You said, this is compromise. You said, this is what love takes. But the truth is, what you were calling love was a plea to be accepted. You weren't building a relationship. You were constructing a performance, hoping that if you played the part well enough, you wouldn't be abandoned. But that performance costs you everything: your vitality, your integrity, your power. And here's the part no one tells you: she can feel it. Even if she can't name it. She knows when a man is no longer standing in his truth. She senses when he's echoing her needs, not voicing his own. And the more you adjust, the less she trusts you, not because you're a bad man, but because you're not a real one anymore. You don't need to lie to lose yourself. You only need to stop being fully, fearlessly you. She doesn't want safe, she wants sovereign. You tried to be safe thinking that's what would make her stay. You kept your edges smooth, your voice soft, your opinions agreeable. You thought if you were steady enough, kind enough, attentive enough, she would feel secure, that she would give you her trust, her loyalty, her heart. But what if safety was never the goal? She may say she wants comfort, but what she truly craves is something much deeper. Not safety, but sovereignty. Not a man who gives her peace by surrendering himself, but a man who is peace even in chaos. The truth is, she's not testing your patience. She's testing your presence. She's asking, can you stay rooted when I am not? Can you hold your shape when I throw fire? Because if you can't, if you bend at every emotional gust of wind, then she knows she can't trust your ground. You gave her stability. But in doing so, you gave up your fire. You became reliable, predictable, comfortable. And that's when the desire began to die. She doesn't want to control you. She wants to feel you fully formed, unbending, centered. She wants to know that even if she pulls away, you won't chase. That even if she tests you, you won't flinch. That even if she loves you, you won't disappear into her expectations. Desire is born in tension, in the unknown, in the presence of a man who cannot be moved, not because he's cold, but because he's complete. The man who becomes small to keep her loses her. The man who stays sovereign, who loves without collapsing, that's the man she cannot forget. Because she doesn't want to own you. She wants to orbit you. Need is silent, but it speaks volumes. You may think she doesn't know how much you need her. You believe you've kept it subtle, the eagerness in your replies, the way your mood shifts with her attention, how your energy dips when she doesn't reach out. You haven't said the words, but everything about you says them, please choose me. And she feels it. Need isn't inherently wrong. We all want connection. But when need becomes your identity, when her presence determines your peace, it becomes weakness. Not in the masculine, emotional sense, but in the energetic sense. You stop being the man she met, the one who moved with direction, who gave from abundance. Instead, you begin giving with expectation, hoping, waiting, quietly begging. And this is the paradox. The more you need her, the less she feels desire. Not because she's shallow, but because she's intuitive. Women are biologically wired to respond to grounded masculine energy, the kind that provides, protects, and stands still. When that energy turns into anxious grasping, she doesn't feel safe, she feels pressure. And pressure crushes attraction. She doesn't want to be your savior. She doesn't want to be your reason for waking up. She wants to feel your presence, not your dependence. You think your love will win her over. That vulnerability will earn loyalty. But when love comes from lack, it becomes a transaction. Please complete me and I will give you everything. But she doesn't want to complete you. She wants to meet you whole, rooted already, full. And only when you no longer need her does she feel what she couldn't before: freedom, clarity, and real desire. The man who doesn't reach for her is the man she reaches for. She didn't fall in love with your availability. She didn't fall for the way you always said the right thing, or how you responded within seconds, or how you made her the center of your universe. She fell for the man she couldn't quite explain. There was something in the way you carried yourself. The stillness in your eyes, the way you didn't rush to please, the way your life seemed full long before she entered it. You didn't offer her access to everything at once. You let her wonder. And in that wonder, desire was born. But somewhere along the way, you gave her everything. Every thought, every emotion, Every secret, every piece of yourself, not because she earned it, but because you thought it would keep her. You believed vulnerability would make her feel closer. You thought transparency would create trust. But it didn't. It erased tension. It removed the space where imagination lives. And with it, the mystery died. She no longer had questions about you. She knew your every move. You became safe, predictable, understandable. And as much as she appreciated your love, she stopped feeling pulled by it. Attraction doesn't live in certainty. It lives in polarity, in the distance between what she knows and what she feels but can't name. The more readable you became, the less magnetic you were. This isn't about playing games. It's about remembering the version of you she loved was the one who didn't need to be understood. She didn't fall for the man who gave everything. She fell for the man who made her earn access to his world slowly, intentionally, with respect. The moment you stopped being a mystery was the moment you stopped being irresistible. Power isn't performance. It isn't found in strategies or seduction techniques. It's not about how well you can mirror her emotions or recite the right words at the perfect moment. Power, real power, is authenticity. The man who knows who he is and refuses to betray that for anyone carries a presence that doesn't need explanation. He doesn't seek permission. He doesn't chase applause. He doesn't negotiate his truth just to keep her interested. And in a world addicted to illusion, that kind of man is magnetic. You can feel him when he walks into a room. He's not loud. He doesn't posture. He doesn't demand attention. But your attention drifts to him anyway, because he's rooted, because there's no gap between who he is and who he pretends to be. There is no mask. That's what women feel but cannot describe. It's not your muscles, not your job, not even your charm. It's your congruence, the unshakable energy of a man who no longer flinches in the face of disapproval. And here's the hard truth. If you're still trying to impress her, she can feel it, and it repels her. Not because she's arrogant, but because your energy is seeking something. And seeking energy always feels like a transaction. But when you give without needing, speak without fear, love without bending, she feels it. Authenticity is not something you perform, it's something you protect. Because when everything else fades, looks, titles, tactics, the only thing that remains is whether you were real. And the man who is real, who lives from his center and never leaves it for anyone, is the man who doesn't need to prove his power. He is power. There comes a point in a man's life where his greatest strength is no longer in what he says, but in what he doesn't. The younger version of you thought influence came from words. You believed if you could just explain well enough, argue passionately enough, share deeply enough, she would understand you. You thought communication was the key to connection. But with time, something shifted. You learned that presence matters more than performance. And that true presence doesn't always speak. Sometimes it simply is. The older man, the one who's lived through heartbreak, who's stood alone, who's buried versions of himself, knows this. He knows that silence, when it's rooted in self-possession, says more than 1,000 clever phrases ever could. He doesn't fill the air to avoid discomfort. He doesn't rush to fix, justify, or chase clarity. He holds his stillness like a sword, not as a weapon, but as a boundary. And she feels it, not because he's cold, but because he's whole. Because he no longer leaks energy trying to be heard, liked, or saved. That kind of silence is unnerving. It doesn't beg. It doesn't seek. It reveals. And when a man is no longer trying to be impressive, he becomes magnetic. She may not know why she feels drawn to him, only that she does. Because deep in her instincts, she recognizes a man who does not vanish in emotional chaos. A man who stands still when others chase approval. And in that silence, she doesn't hear absence. She hears certainty. The quiet presence of a man who no longer explains himself because he has nothing left to prove. Real freedom terrifies people, especially in relationships, because a man who is truly free, who is not emotionally enslaved, who doesn't beg to be understood, who doesn't shift to keep the peace is both disarming and unforgettable. He is not cruel. He is not indifferent, but he is unowned. And that makes everyone around him feel something primal, awe, and fear, especially her. You may think giving her everything, your time, your energy, your vulnerability, your explanations will bring her closer. But the man she remembers is the one she couldn't move, the one who didn't chase when she withdrew, the one who didn't bend when she tested, the one who stood firm in the face of her storm, not out of pride, but out of wholeness. She doesn't want to break you. She wants to feel you, not your performance, not your emotional acrobatics. She wants to feel the weight of a man who doesn't collapse. And that weight is freedom. Not the selfish adolescent kind, but the deeply earned kind, the kind that says, I will not betray myself to be loved. I will not rearrange who I am to make you stay. I am complete, and I will not apologize for it. That kind of man is rare. And when a woman meets him, she doesn't forget, because he awakens something ancient in her, a recognition that she's not in control and never was, not of him, not of his soul, not of his peace. And in that recognition, desire is reborn, because in a world full of men begging to be chosen, he is the one who chooses himself. There's a particular kind of betrayal that no one sees, because it doesn't scream. It doesn't slam doors or leave scars. It happens quietly beneath the surface under the name of keeping the peace. And yet it's the most dangerous betrayal of all, the one you commit against yourself. It starts subtly. You let her win the argument not because she's right, but because you're tired. You soften your truth because it might cause tension. You say yes when your soul screams no, just to avoid one more emotional storm. And with each of those moments, you think you're doing the mature thing. You call it love. You call it sacrifice. You convince yourself that this is what it means to be a good man. But it's not. It's abandonment. Not of her, of you. Because peace that costs you your voice, your values, your integrity isn't peace. It's a prison with comfortable sheets. And over time, you begin to feel it, not in arguments, but in silence. In the moments where you realize she doesn't even know who you are anymore because you stopped showing up. You thought keeping her meant keeping everything stable, but she didn't fall in love with your stability. She fell in love with your presence, your edge, your fire. And every time you smothered that fire to make her comfortable, you became less of the man she admired. Eventually, she'll feel it too, the hollowness in your voice, the absence of resistance. And she won't say it out loud, but she'll start to pull away. Not because you weren't kind, but because you were gone. A man's soul is not meant to be negotiated. It's meant to be lived fully, fiercely, and without apology. Because no relationship is worth keeping if you have to disappear to stay in it. Most men run from being alone, not because they hate solitude, but because without someone else's attention, they forget who they are. So they fill their lives with noise, with women, with distractions. They chase validation through affection, thinking closeness will protect them from the truth they've never wanted to face, that when everything goes quiet, they don't know how to stand. But solitude isn't a punishment. It's the forge. It's where the masks fall, where no one is watching, where no performance can survive. It's in that raw stillness when the texts stop coming, when no one's reaching for you, when no one needs you, that something dangerous and beautiful happens. You meet yourself, the real self, not the version that bends to be liked, not the persona that exists to be chosen, but the man beneath all of that. In solitude, you remember your own voice. You rediscover what you believe, not what you were told to say to keep the peace. You learn to walk not because someone's watching, but because you must. And that's where power begins. Because the man who's willing to face himself without needing comfort, distraction, or applause becomes something few people have ever met whole. She may come back, or she may not. But that's no longer the point. The man who's been forged in solitude doesn't chase, doesn't collapse, doesn't perform. He gives love from overflow, not from need. And he never forgets what it took to find himself alone, unguarded. And finally, true. You think love is about proving yourself, about showing her how much you care, how present you are, how willing you are to meet her needs. You think that if you give more attention, affection, availability, she'll see your value and stay. But the truth is far more paradoxical. She doesn't come when you need her. She comes when you don't. Not because you're cold, not because you're playing a game, but because something in her awakens when she feels the energy of a man who could walk away and still remain whole. Need feels like weight, like pressure, like a silent demand to be completed. And no woman, no matter how loving, wants to carry the burden of being your emotional oxygen. She doesn't want to be your savior. She wants to be chosen by a man who doesn't need to be saved. That's the shift. When your identity no longer depends on her response. When your peace isn't tied to her mood. When you stop chasing validation and start embodying presence, something changes. She feels it. It's in your calm, your clarity, your stillness. The energy that says, "You're welcome here, but I was already whole before you arrived." And that kind of man is rare, because most men are performing hoping to be picked. But the man who no longer needs to be chosen becomes unforgettable. Not because he chased her, but because he didn't. Not because he withdrew love, but because he gave it from overflow, not from hunger. She doesn't want to complete you. She wants to join you. And that only happens when you finally stop needing her to. You've spent most of your life trying to be chosen. You've shaped yourself to fit her vision, softened your truth to keep her close, hid your boundaries to avoid the sting of rejection. And all of it was done with the same silent hope. Maybe if I give enough, she'll stay. But here's what no one tells you. The more you chase her approval, the more you lose your authority over your own story. You were never meant to be an accessory in someone else's narrative. You were never meant to rewrite yourself in real time to keep someone comfortable. You are not a background character. You are not a reaction to her choices. You are the story. And the moment you realize that not just intellectually, but viscerally, everything changes. You stop asking, "What does she think of me?" and start asking, "Is this who I am with or without her?" Because a man who centers his life around someone else's validation will always live in emotional poverty. But the man who claims authorship, who writes his own pages, who speaks his own truth, who sets his own pace becomes unforgettable. Not because he begged to be seen, but because he no longer needs to be. You don't need her permission to be powerful. You don't need her attention to be whole. You don't need her approval to be you. She can read your story or she can walk away from it. But what matters most is that you'll keep writing it anyway. Not for her, not for them, for you. There's a quiet crisis happening in the hearts of men today. Not because they don't love hard enough, not because they aren't willing to give, but because in their attempt to be good men, they've traded authenticity for acceptance and lost themselves in the process. This message isn't about blaming women. It's about awakening men to a truth. Society rarely speaks aloud that being chosen is not the same as being whole. The core lesson is simple, but not easy. You must stop shaping yourself to fit into her world and start building a world of your own. You were not born to be agreeable. You were not made to be molded. You are not a project to be edited by the expectations of someone else. You are the author. You are the edge. You are the fire. And yes, that comes at a cost. You will face solitude. You will face misunderstanding. You will stand alone in rooms where others fold. But in that stillness, in that radical self-honesty, you will find the one thing no relationship can give you: sovereignty. She may walk away, or she may come closer than ever before. But her response is not the reward. Your wholeness is. Love, when it's real, will never ask you to betray yourself. It won't require your silence. It won't shrink your voice. It won't punish your depth. And if what you've been calling love demands those things, it's not love. It's survival disguised as romance. So here's the lesson. If you want to be unforgettable, not to her, but to yourself, stop reaching for validation and start returning to your truth. Stand where you are. Speak from your core. Don't explain your presence, embody it. Because the moment you stop trying to be what she wants, you become the man she didn't know she needed. And more importantly, you become the man you were always meant to be.